Hi and welcome to the Room of Rock with Ted and I. Now this time in the Room of Rock, my long-suffering Squire Strat comes in for yet more attention. This time in the shape of a refret, and I'm going to have a go at doing it myself. Now, if seeing if I mess it up or pull it off interests you, stick around. Well, at this stage, as I do the intro, I haven't started the job yet, so I've no idea whether I have success and pull the job off, whether I hash it up, or whether I have to abandon it and get it done professionally. I know I hear you say, well, it's only a Squire Strat. It is only a Squire Strat, and a fairly cheap one, but it's a much loved, fairly cheap Squire Strat, so I don't want to ruin it because it gets quite a lot of use. Hence the fact that it needs a refret, because the frets are worn so low over the course of time. I've had the guitar about 25 years now, had it from new, and it's for most of its life had fairly heavy strings on it. It's got 11s on it, so I assume that probably the extra oomph, as it were, of heavier grade strings do take more toll on the frets. But the frets are worn pretty low, and it's one of those things that I didn't really notice until I started using things like the Epiphone Les Paul that I bought to do the headstock conversion on. It's suddenly you realise that the tips of your fingers are in too much contact with the fretboard when you're bending strings and things, rather than being off the fretboard and the strings riding more on the crown of the fret. And when I looked at the frets on this, they looked too low to me to be worth redressing and try to re-crown. The best course of action is a refret. Now I do have a cunning plan B up my sleeve. If that I didn't get the job done, or if I made a mess of trying to get the frets out, I've looked on eBay, and there are Strat necks for sale reasonably cheaply. So what I would do is buy a second-hand neck, taking the view that they're going to have far less fret wear than my one has. Quite often with these things, I think there's more guitars sit in cupboards and hang on walls than ever do get played. Certainly on the more budget end guitars. So that's my plan B. If I make a right mess of it, it would be to source a second-hand neck off of eBay to salvage the guitar. Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll show you some of the tools that I've got. I'm going to use obviously a mixture of one or two specialist tools I've bought, and some everyday tools, woodworking tools or whatever that I've got around the house for general work. So we'll have a look at those and I'll show you those. Now I'll be honest with you, when you look at the tools I bought, now I've bought these over a period of time, it starts eating into the cost of getting someone to do the job for you. But what's the fun in that? Having a go at it yourself is quite rewarding, and if you pull it off and it's actually nice and playable, then it's quite an achievement. The good thing with this guitar as a first go at fretting a guitar is A, it's a bolt-on neck, obviously, as all Strat style guitars are, so I can take the neck off the body, meaning that the body can stay safely in the Room of Rock so it won't get knocked about as I'm working on the neck. And the neck has got a rosewood fingerboard, so it's not a lacquered maple board, which would make it harder to get the frets out without damaging the lacquer. I think you have to pretty well scalpel through the lacquer to break it before you start trying to get the frets out. So as necks go, it's about as easy a neck as you can get to have a go at refretting. There's no edge binding, of course, to worry about. As I say, it's a rosewood board and it's a bolt-on neck, so in essence the only bit that I need to take somewhere to work on in the shed or whatever is the actual neck itself. So the first job on the list is to de-string the guitar and get the neck off. So let's get that done. Well, I've brought the camera in a bit closer to show you a couple of things. First of all, this has got, I don't know if you can see those, they're locking tuners, but they're front locking. So the idea is you feed the string through, and as you start to wind up, the little end of the string post compresses down and nips the string, which is good. But what I'll do, I'm going to just take the tops off, because that'll mean they're out of the way, so when I'm using like the sanding beam, there's no danger of me scuffing the chrome on them. So I'm just going to remove the tops, and that means then if I hold the guitar around, if you can see, they're now nice and low, well out of the way. I might end up having to take the tuners off, but I don't think I should if I'm careful. So I just thought I'd show you that. So the ends just on this particular guitar just unscrew. You might, if you had a longer set of tuners or staggered tuners, which some Strats have, may decide it's best to take them out and put them on somewhere safe so that they don't get scratched or anything. But there you go, that's just those coming out. So now the next job on the list is to get the neck off the guitar. And as I always say in these kind of videos, and it bears repeating, use the right size screwdriver. What you want is you want a lovely snug fit, no play in there. You should be able to get screws out of a guitar and back in without it looking like you've tampered with them, without any marking and marring. Because if you do mark these and make them sharp, you know, it is a position where your hand's going to be when you're playing in the upper frets. So the last thing you want is that to feel sharp. It could cut your hand, and it's just not going to enhance the playing experience. So take care, make sure you've got the right size screwdriver. As I always say, they're cheap enough to buy, so if you haven't, just buy one. You know, good tools have never been more accessible and cheaper. So nice snug fit, make sure it's not going to jump out, and then just gently, there you go, just break the tension. And it's a good idea, good practice, rather than take one all the way out, is just to, there you go, you can feel the tension release, just take them out a bit at a time. And as I've mentioned previously, unless you're very experienced, I don't recommend you using drill drivers on your guitar, because if it slips and goes across the body, obviously you're in a world of pain. And also, if it jumps out of the slot, then it will have chewed the screw up long before you've had a chance to release the trigger on the drill driver. So that's just my opinion. So take them out gently, there's no rush of course, just gently get them out. Now the neck will gently come off the body, so the body then stays here in the room of rock for safety. It doesn't need to go anywhere near the shed or anywhere. And there I have my neck. Well, I brought the camera in a bit closer to try and show you some of the fretwear, and whether you'll better pick up on that I don't know, but there's obviously some notching here in the lower frets which probably would polish out and re-crown, but the majority of the wear is down here around the 10th, 12th fret, where the frets are very wide and low through use, and that's where I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of fingertip contact with the rosewood on the neck. on looking at this, one thing I sort of have noticed, and it's made me slightly wary, is, as I mentioned in my previous video, the 22nd fret on this neck, the fingerboard overhangs the actual body of the neck, which is something Fender do when they make 22 fret necks. So that element of the rosewood at the very end is fairly unsupported. So that's going to need quite a bit of care, removing the fret and pushing the new fret in without risk of just cracking that end part of the rosewood off, which would be a complete disaster. So that's something I am slightly concerned about and will take extra care over to try and avoid a disaster. Well, to start off, I thought I'd show you some of the tools I've got to start the job. First thing I've got here is what we call a neck caul, which is a U-shaped block of wood with cork lining on it to support the neck, so I can lay the neck in here and work on it, and if I'm pushing in frets, the back of the neck won't get damaged because the cork will protect it. So that's going to be a vital piece of kit for working. One tool I made was I bought this inexpensive pair of cutters, and what I've done with them, because I want to use these to try and pull the frets out of the neck, I've ground them down here so that they are very flush where they cut, and the idea being I want to be able to gently ease the fret up by wiggling them under it so it starts to lift the fret. So that was about £3.99, that cutter. So that was just something I thought I'd have a go at and see if I could do. So we'll see if that works. So that's one tool I've got. Another tool is this one, which is just a standard 3 square second cut metal file. But what I've done with it is I've ground a safe edge along here and along here and along here. Hopefully you can see that in the light if I wiggle it around, so that's smooth. The idea being, if I'm shaping the frets, that the end won't actually dig into the fretboard wood, so I could start to shape the frets. I might not use that, I'll just did it out of curiosity to see whether it would work as an idea. So that's one tool. This tool, if you've seen other videos of mine, you would see this is my Baroque fret crowning file, and it's got 3 profiles on it, and I used it when I set up the vintage guitar, and I've marked the profile that suited the vintage guitar, which is probably very similar to the one for the Strat. The other one's very wide, which is probably for bass frets, and one's fairly narrow, which is probably more for, say, a vintage narrower fret. So I've got that to use. Another file I've got is one I bought like this. This is a fretting file, but it's for the ends, really, just for rounding around the ends of the frets to make them smooth. And again, if you look, if you can see that, that's got a safe edge on both sides, so that won't actually damage the fretboard while you're filing around the ends of the frets, just to make them smooth. So I've got that to use. What else? I've got this. Now I bought this. This is a well, it's from Crimson Guitars, as you can see. It's a fret leveling beam, and I've got to be honest, it's nicely made, but when I looked at it I thought if I'd known it was going to be like that, I could have really just used a metal spirit level with a ground edge on it, which I have got one of those, and just stuck my emery paper or wet and dry paper on that to level off the tops of the frets. So anyway, I bought that, and then they do some, pop that down there, some pre-cut adhesive 320 abrasive paper to stick on there. So I've got that. One other thing I've got, specialist tool, is this little saw. Now hopefully you can see that shows up in the light. The idea for that saw, it's very narrow and the teeth are face either way, is when you've removed the fret, and you can just run it in the fret slot gently just to remove any debris, maybe any little bits of wood in there that shouldn't be in there, or any bits of old adhesive that shouldn't be in there, so that when you put the new frets in, they seat down properly and there's nothing wanting to make them lift, so that the head of the fret sits nice and flush with the fingerboard of the guitar. So I've got that to use. One of the last things I bought, which only arrived this week, was this, which is a Graphtec tusk nut for the Strat. It's pre-cut. It'll need a bit of finessing to make it fit and adjust the height possibly, but it's pre-cut for the Strat. The reason I bought this is I'm going to have to take the nut out when I level the fret, so that the fretting beam can travel right across the first fret and not travel so far and then clout the nut. So that the nut's going to have to come out, and sometimes that's a destructive process. If the nut's glued in and it's quite well fixed in there, I might have to saw it across its width gently and then collapse it in on itself with pliers, so it'll come out without chipping out any of the wood on the edge of the fingerboard. So and also, as the new frets are going to be higher because they're new, you might find, or I might find, that the original nut is now too low and will cause fret buzz. So I've preempted that by buying that. And the fact is, it's meant to improve tone, because the nut on the guitar at the moment is just a cheap plastic one. It's very nicely cut, to be fair. It's, you know, there's nothing wrong with the way it was cut. It's just not a particularly good material, and this being low friction would be obviously a bonus on a Strat with a tremolo. So that's something that will get fitted at some point. One thing they always say and recommend is when you're going to do any job like this, you want a nice uncluttered workspace, and this is nothing like an uncluttered workspace. It's my shed. There's general clutter everywhere, bits from old projects lying around and muck on the bench, but I'm going to clear a little area of it on which I'm going to work. But it just goes to show that we don't all have an ideal workspace to have a go at doing these jobs. You just got to be a little bit creative at times. So there you go, the shed of rust, as I call it. The first thing I've done, got the neck now sitting in the cool on the workbench. I've checked it with this, which is a notched straight edge. So I've put that on there, and there is a little bit of relief in the neck, so the neck's angled backwards from, I suppose, the truss rod where that's been set to counteract the string tension, but it's as little as I can get it by slackening the truss rod, because I don't think on this guitar it's a dual acting truss rod, and I'm reluctant to keep unwinding it just to find that the nut comes off the end of the truss rod or something and gives me a load of grief. So that's where it is. So the next job now, having done that, will be to get my soldering iron. This is an old soldering iron bit, which is, I've got a very slight curve in, so it'll ride on the frets, to heat the frets up to then try and aid easing them out. Now I'll be honest, this is the bit I'm worried about. This is sort of kind of make or break for me, is getting the frets out without damaging the fingerboard. So let's get the soldering iron hot and see how we get on. Well, as you can see, I've got a lot of the frets out now. I'm just left with the top frets, the one I was worried about and the one next to it. I just thought I'd show you me getting that out. What I've found is typically the ones nearer the top of the neck have been harder to get out. There seems to be more resistance. Whether it's because they're into a thicker lump of wood, I don't know, and they were pushed in a bit harder in the factory, I'm not sure, but they do seem to be a bit more resilient to coming out. So again, I shall get some heat in it. It seems heat is the friend. being careful not to hit the position markers, because obviously they're plastic, so they would melt. And start it off by just getting that underneath, and then just sliding in the fret guard, and then just pinching away, so you're putting pressure on the metal rather than the wood of the neck, and the idea being that as you squeeze the metal down, it should stop or minimise any breakout of the wood. And what I've found is it's worth just keeping a bit more heat in it. I suppose the heat expands the metal of the fret, so it makes it a bit looser in the slot, so then you can, so there we go, just get a bit more heat on that. Obviously trying to take my time so I don't mess anything up, and then that's out in the pile of rotten frets. Now this one here is the one I'm worried about, so I'm going to start off just getting plenty of heat up one end in particular, so that I can then start it, because I really don't want to obviously damage the end of the fingerboard, because that will be game over for this neck and the video. So hopefully I've got enough heat there that I can try and just start that fret off. Right, I can feel that's come up. I don't know if you can see that that's come up. So now just continue adding heat. Work my way along a bit more, slide that under, again apply a bit more heat, especially on this one because of the position of it. And that's the last fret out now, so good. That's half the battle, or certainly half the battle with that fret. Well, they're all the old frets in their various mangled form as I've pulled them out. What I decided to do now, rightly or wrongly, and this is not a tutorial at all, this is me having a go, is just with a light sandpaper just sand the edges of the fret slots, because they're feeling slightly raised, probably from where the frets have come out. There's just a little edge there that might hamper the new fret going in. So I've got some 600 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to gently rub across to take any lip off, making sure I don't hit the position markers. I don't really want to disturb the fingerboard any more than necessary, because any wear in it is kind of wear that I've put in it, and I'm quite happy for that to remain because it's part and parcel of the guitar. But I thought I'd just make sure that there's no edge at all that might impede the fret going in, the new fret being pushed in. Well, as I mentioned, just sanded across the fret slots so that anything where it's slightly raised now is level. I think the sanding marks you see will disappear once I oil the neck, which I'll do before I put strings on it. So now what I'm going to do is just gently make sure the frets are the slots are clean using this little saw that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to gently don't want to deepen the slot, I just want to get any muck out of it. That's all I'm trying to do. Well, this is the fret wire I've bought to refret the guitar with. It's Dunlop 6105 Jumbo, and it's meant to be a hard wire, so hopefully it's a reasonable match for what was already in there. It's interesting looking at the fret slots because some of them do go straight off the edge of the neck, and some definitely look like they stop short. Now whether that's just poor machining or not, but it's hard to know. That's definitely, for example, if you can see this end here, that definitely looks like the fret slots are cut short, they don't actually go off, whereas some others, like here, if you can see that one, that definitely does. So it's going to make the job slightly more fiddly than I'd hoped. The new fret wire I've bought is cut to length and it's already pre-radiused, so it meant that because you could buy this cheaply in a roll, but you'd need to be able to put a radius in it yourself, and as I haven't got a radiusing tool, I decided to buy it in pre-cut lengths. They're all the same length, so they don't taper down, so I'll have to tap them in and then cut them down as I work my way down the neck. A pot of water there, and there's the tight bond, so a rag. So first things first, I'm going to apply a little bit of tight bond to the joint and then just wipe the excess out with water. And to put the frets in, I've bought this. It's a brand new. It's just a nylon soft-faced hammer, but it's brand new, so there's no damage. It's not been used for knocking off brakes, shoes or anything like that, so it's not covered in grease and oil, so it shouldn't actually mark the top of the frets. A little bit of adhesive. Then the fret with the tang that I've ground back, just push that over. Now let's gently, don't know which is the softest face on that, but done is started at the middle and worked out. Now it certainly looks, I don't know if you can see that, certainly looks like that's properly seated, and also the top of it is unmarked from what I've done with the hammer, so that's good, so that shows that works. So now I'll just dampen a little bit of cloth and wipe away any of the excess adhesive that might be on the fingerboard, and then I'll just snip off the excess of this fret. So I shall leave it obviously a bit proud, and the neighbour's cutting his grass. There we go, one down, 21 to go. It's times like this I wish I had a 3 fret neck, I think. Well, as you can see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frets in, and I'm going to be honest, it's not a quick process, but then I didn't expect it to be. But I thought I'll show you me putting another one in. So what I'm doing, and you know, again, this isn't a tutorial, it's just a cowboy having a go at it himself, seeing if he can. So I'm putting a bit of tight bond into the slot. I think this will be a double-edged sword, as it were, because I think this will help keep the new fret seated, and B, it'll help secure any maybe areas that were slightly loosened by pulling out any edges of the fret slot that was slightly loosened by the extraction of the old fret. So what I've been doing is starting in the middle and working my way out to each edge. So then just double checking that the crown of the fret is right down on the fingerboard, so it's well seated. So then after that, dampen a little bit of the paper towel and some water just to wipe off any excess adhesive. Well, here we are about to put the last fret in, the one that I was most worried about. All the others are now in and tapped in. The ends are still very sharp. I've just nipped them back basically. I've trimmed the ends back because this fret doesn't look like when it was fitted the fret slot was cut to the end of the board either side. So I'm now going to pluck up my courage, apply some tight bond into the slot as I've done with the others. Right, I'm at the point of doing the last fret. I've cut it to length and I've looked at it, and it is a slightly better supported than I'd thought, but here we go. I'm going to take a deep breath and tap the fret in. Just hope I don't damage the neck, because there's been quite a lot of work gone into it up thus far, and obviously I don't want to ruin all that at the 11th hour. So here we go. And what I've done, as you can probably see, is I'm not using the caul because it's on the flat part, the back of the neck now, so I've just got a hardwood block on the bench that I'm using. Well, I can breathe a sigh of relief because that's the last fret in. I've just cut the ends off a little bit so they're a bit neater, ready for filing and dressing. And there we go, all the frets in. We're going to leave the video there for the moment, because if I carried on I think it was getting too long. So where we are now, we've got all the new frets in. They just need to be filed at the ends, dressed, levelled and polished. So it's a fair bit of work there, and obviously then the guitar reassembled. So come back and that'll be in the next video, which I'll put a link to up there, I think.